My guest today is Mark Friedlander, Director of Corporate Communications at the Insurance Information Institute, a think tank dedicated to providing objective, fact-based information about insurance. Today we'll be talking about the new legislation that has been passed by the Florida legislature in a special session only last week. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks again for having me, David. Really appreciate being back here.
Is the insurance industry happy about this legislation, and why?
The consensus is the insurance industry is very happy. We consider this to be groundbreaking legislation. In fact, in our opinion, we've never seen such a strong insurance reform package pass through the Florida legislature.
Wow.
This is new territory. I mean, in the past, we've had the Senate pushing strong legislation, the House blocking it. Now we have new leaders in place. There's a new House Speaker. There's a new Senate President. They were clearly in sync from the get-go that we have a major crisis on our hands and need to do something very drastic in terms of the industry to get it back on track, to begin at least a road to stability. And I think that's what this package accomplishes.
How does it accomplish that?
Two key drivers of the Florida property insurance crisis have been litigation abuse and roof claim fraud abuse, or really, I guess for a more general term, assignment of benefits abuse. Roof claim fraud is a big part of that, but overall, assignment of benefits abuse. So once again, litigation abuse, assignment of benefits abuse. Those were the key areas that needed to be addressed. And in the past, we've talked about the need for the industry to no longer be required to pay one-way attorney fees. We've heard this from industry leaders for many, many years. As I said, the Senate tried to push through legislation in the past, blocked by the House. It never made it to the House floor. This time it did, and this time it passed. That's the big ticket item, one-way attorney fees, because those are the fees that have been driving Florida's domiciled regional insurers out of business. In fact, 6 companies failed this year. They were declared insolvent because of excessive levels of litigation. Literally, they were litigated out of business. There are 27 other companies still on the Florida insurance regulators watch list today because of heavy litigation losses. And now we have Hurricane Ian on top of this. And one important point on this new legislation, it's not retroactive. So all the claims that have been filed for Hurricanes Ian and Nicole that may lead to litigation, those still fall within the guidelines of the old regulation, which is one-way attorney fees could be assessed. So could we see more Florida insurers fail because of litigation? Absolutely. And then we just have all these other cases in the pipeline. I was informed the other day there are more than 100,000 assignment of benefits lawsuits working their way through the Florida court system. Those are non-hurricane losses,
Wow.
AOBs. It will take up to 5 years for those to clear through the system. Those expenses will continue to hit the bottom lines of insurers. So to think this landmark legislation, which it is, will make the problems go away immediately, unfortunately, not the case.
One thing I noticed as I was kind of reading through the bill, and I'm not an expert on this, so a little bit of a layman's perspective, but I did see that the assignment of benefits removal won't be enforced, forgetting about claims, on policies incepting on January 1st. So for a policy incepting today, they can still assign the benefit of the claim for the duration of that policy. So it's going to be a little while before at least that particular reform, the effects of that reform will bite.
Exactly, and I'm sure there's a very large volume of AOBs related to the hurricane. In fact, we know of, unfortunately, unscrupulous contractors working the streets of the neighborhoods that were devastated by Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida, getting homeowners to sign on the bottom line, sign the form that we'll take care of the claim for you. Sign here, it's called assignment of benefits. We'll handle everything for you. And unfortunately, many homeowners that were devastated, just completely devastated with losses of their property from the hurricane, have been scammed into signing AOBs. So yes, there's a lot of AOBs in the system, and new ones, as you said, brand new ones coming our way.
And listeners can go to my podcast primarily with Dave DeMott, which I actually produced, which had some specific stories of all of these things if they want to get some on the ground detail, which I found really really enlightening for myself. The one other thought that kind of I'm wondering about here is, if the two big reforms are assignment of benefits no longer possible in Florida on policies incepting on or after January 1st, 2023, and the other one is one-way attorney fees have been removed. To your knowledge, are the one-way attorney fees, is that going to happen is that a claims filing thing? So if you file a claim today, you do not get a one-way attorney fee, but if the claim's in the system from last week, you can. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
That's the way it has been explained to me. It was effective immediately on Friday, December 16th. Anything filed before then is subject to the old regulations, meaning one-way attorney fees apply. And by the way, I should mention, we're hearing a lot from the plaintiffs' bar, very upset about this, understandably so.
Yes.
Big money maker for many firms around the country, around the state, rather. We know that. It's going to change the dynamics of the way these plaintiffs' firms operate. But Florida becomes the 40th state in the nation to eliminate one-way attorney fees. So it's not like Florida's made some new rule in the world of legal related claim filings. We're number 40. We're way behind the 8 ball. Florida should have taken this step years ago. And that is a big reason why you see Florida such an outlier when it comes to the volume of property claim lawsuits year after year. I mean, we're on pace this year. This is before the hurricanes. We estimated 130,000 property claim related lawsuits, either first party or AOB related property claim lawsuits. 116,000 last year. We've checked the totals across the country. We've looked at the data. 3,900 was the next largest state. That was California. And California has twice as many properties to insure than Florida does. Population is nearly double Florida's. So 3,900 in California, 116,000 in Florida last year. We knew we had a major problem. This problem has grown year after year. This didn't come about overnight. All of a sudden, somebody flipped on a switch and said, what's going on in Florida? This has been growing more and more. The legislature looked at it every year, never did anything about it, and now we're in a crisis. So the problem is, how fast can you fix this? Because we've heard, particularly from the minority party in the legislature, the Democratic Party, very upset with the legislation because it doesn't bring an immediate fix. Well, we wish there could be an immediate fix. That's just not realistic. We need to crawl before we walk and walk before we run to get this Florida insurance crisis under control. It is so out of control, it's going to take several years to moderate. Not just weeks, months, days, several years to moderate. So what are we going to see going forward? Our projection is rates are going up more next year. We're at 33% average increases right now in Florida, amongst the highest average increases in the country. We'll be 40% plus next year. That's because of the outstanding litigation costs, higher cost of reinsurance, replacement cost values, which is a national issue. Replacement costs are running double the CPI right now. You can't eliminate those. So every homeowner in the country is seeing higher rates. You're not going to see lower rates in Florida, even if all the litigation disappeared today. You are not going to see lower premium in Florida. So any legislator who's promising lower rates are coming soon, they need to do their homework on it, unfortunately.
Do you kind of read into that? Because I hear that I'm a little worried. I understand that listen, I spent a lot of years as a reinsurance actuary. I understand when you put in a change, it's very hard for the insurance companies to tell what's that really going to be worth. So to commit to some kind of lower pricing in advance is suicide for insurance companies. So totally get that. But if you're a voter and you don't have that experience and you're saying, okay, so I'm now, some of the interested groups being the plaintiffs' attorneys, but hey, listen, to a certain degree, I think they're on my side, or at least they say they are, and they probably are in a kind of a short-term sort of manner. They're saying to me that this is going to take away some of my ability to fight against the big bad insurance companies, and now my rates are going to go up anyway. So do you worry about like a political backlash sometime next year when that does happen? Or to what degree that happens, and people are saying, well, we did what you wanted us to do, and now you're not giving us anything back for it.
I don't think there were any politicians that passed this bill, that approved the bill, those who voted yes for it, that promised rates were declining. The promise was we will get the market stable. And I'm not sure, like I said, once again, were there specific timelines laid out? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is unfortunately a situation that can't be fixed right away. And nobody should be promising that it's going to be resolved and you're going to see a much better market soon. It's just not going to happen. We need to get this under control. And as I said a few minutes ago, it's possible more companies are going to fail before the situation gets under control here in Florida.
Well, hopefully, if I think of if you're DeSantis with an eye on the presidential election, the thing you don't want to happen here is this thing to go to blow up in your face as being, I mean, I don't know. I don't totally understand the nuances of the politics. No doubt he really does. But, as a possibility, it's a pretty big call for him. And, I've done some work in the past in situations where there's a kind of a real negative feedback loop in the pricing environment. And I understand the urge on behalf usually of more left-leaning politicians, but not always, to then just legislate a price decrease and saying, okay, we're going to trade here. Trade is you get less claims costs, we get lower premium, and we're going to through the DOI, we're going to force carriers, or we're going to put a moratorium on rate increases, something like that, right? So at least we know we're going to get something out of the bargain, right? But they don't have that here, so there's a risk that they're going to look bad.
Well, what I could tell you is what I know what was negotiated in the legislature last week. Some of the Democrats were pushing for a rate freeze. Just freeze it for now, so it won't go up more. If you put a rate freeze in place, you're going to drive more companies out of business. Either they're going to completely fail, or they're just going to leave the state and say, we cannot operate in the state of Florida under these conditions. That will just make the market worse. And we've heard from the Republican leadership. As we know, we have a supermajority now in Florida in both the House and Senate, very strong Republican blocs in both. And while the leaders did not accept any of the amendments that were proposed by Democrats in the special session last week, they're at least willing to listen to some of those and bring them forth in the regular session, which starts in March. It runs March and April next year. So at least they are listening. But in terms of this specific bill that was pushed through very quickly in a 3-day special session last week, Senate Bill 2A, no changes were made. It was in sync from the get-go. It was introduced the Friday evening before by the House and Senate. It moved quickly through committees and to floor votes, and it was signed by Governor DeSantis on Friday the 16th. So no changes were made, but at least it sounds like the new leadership is willing to listen to other opinions on can we make more adjustments going forward.
I mean, that is incredible. I mean, they clearly came in knowing exactly what was going to happen. I mean, this is all locked in, maybe even before or the moment the election result was called. Because did you just say, and this is something I didn't really realize, that they probably tried to do something more aggressive at the earlier special session, but didn't have the sufficient supermajority, I suppose, in all the branches of the Florida government to do something? Well,
actually, the problem with the May special session was the Senate was willing to take the similar steps that were just passed. The House leadership was against it and would not move forward, specifically on the one-way attorney fee issue. So it was blocked. It never made it any further.
Right.
It just died, the idea. So new leadership, and the new leadership, we've known for months who the new leadership was going to be. We knew who the new House Speaker was going to be, knew who the new Senate President was going to be. They've been negotiating with other members of the legislature for an extended period, long before the election. So even before the election took place, our understanding is negotiations were taking place between the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. And this was all laid out. Now, yes, more work needed to be done, obviously, because it wasn't introduced until a few days before the session began. So details were being worked out. But the general premise of what was introduced in the bills, it was a complementary Senate and House bills, virtually identical, almost word for word, because it was worked out before. This wasn't done in a rush after the election. Clearly, there were actions being taken long before the election took place.
Do you have any data or any kind of ability to estimate what you think the impact will be on claims cost?
We have not analyzed that. There's just too much in the air, I guess, in terms of data and how long it's going to take to stabilize the market. Here's our projection. I think I already said about rates probably going up at least next year again, perhaps 7 to 8% above where we are this year, maybe 40% plus overall increases on average across the state. The end goal here, at least the initial end goal, or first major goal, maybe let's say it that way. First major goal of this legislation is moderate rate increases. So
right.
The year-over-year increases are not 40% or 50%, or we hear from homeowners they're over 100% in some cases.
Wow.
We need to get that under control. So we need to bring it down. If Florida could get in the high single digits like the national average, that'd be a big win in our eyes. I mean, we think that'd be a great win for consumers. Number two, get the market stable so you interest other companies in writing new home business here in Florida. A more robust market will lead to more choice. More choice means better quoting opportunities. Realistically, you may be able to shop your coverage, which you really can't do right now because in most cases you have to keep the insurance you have, or you go to Citizens, the state-run insurer of last resort. You have no other choices. There are no other private market options for you. Let's get a robust market. And we've heard from some of the agent groups that there is interest in new companies coming to Florida, and soon. I hope that's a reality. But we did hear from some of the agent organizations telling us they've heard that there is interest in companies entering the Florida market. That would be a big win right there if you brought new companies to the market soon.
Well, I'll tell you, I work for one of these agent organizations, and we are constantly talking about how we can bring more capacity into the state of Florida. And that capacity, be it, right up the stack from the insurance companies that would be on the ground, the reinsurers that back them, the investors that back the reinsurers, we also back everybody's freaking out. So, it is super difficult to get people to buy in, and, to the point you were making a moment ago, without this not being an immediate fix. Even if we hadn't had Hurricane Ian, and we did, it still would have been a problem because for years, these companies have been losing, these investors have been losing money on this business. And so, they don't want to sort of see it before they believe it. That said, we're going to keep trying.
Exactly.
Because,
in fact,
I would love to bring a big program to Florida. That'd be great. Clean up.
Exactly. And the other, so that's the positive news. It sounds like there might be some interest. Negative news is we've heard from some of the global reinsurers who indicate the legislation still isn't strong enough.
Interesting. Right. What would they have seen happen?
Specifically, I don't have the details, to be honest, but I've been told that some reinsurers don't feel that what was done is enough to get them to continue to want to invest in Florida companies, meaning offering reinsurance coverage to Florida property insurers. So did it turn the tide of those companies that have been on the fence or already made a decision months ago? We're not touching Florida in 2023. I don't think it changed anybody's mind. I guess that's the takeaway here.
Interesting. What do you have an idea for what other levers are available to pull?
At this point, no. It's that we are a non-lobbying organization. We stay clear of legislative issues. We're on the outside looking at it, through a much wider lens, and we really don't know what else could be done, to be honest. We haven't heard other proposals.
Yeah.
Realistically, I think we have to let this play out some. I mean, these are very dramatic moves here in terms of reform. Like I said, we've never seen anything like it. We call it groundbreaking, landmark, I think are the terms we've used. You got to let it play out. I mean, we did not expect to see magic occur the day the governor signed the bill. That's just not going to happen. And everybody, I think, involved realizes that. Let's let it play out. Let's get things under control. But unfortunately, just taking the litigation pipeline alone and how much is already in the Florida court system or needs to work its way through the system, we've got a long way to go. We're on the 1 yard line, and the other end zone's 99 yards away. That's where we're still at.
Right, and I think where my mind goes is building codes. You still have the problem of the catastrophe risk, and that incredible moment after Hurricane Andrew in I think it was '92, where Florida tried to prevent companies from raising rates and locking the doors to the state, and that's when all the major personal lines carriers exited and have not returned. And so you wind up with this really weird little insurance ecosystem where, except on an excess and surplus basis, you don't get access to the big brands if you're in Florida, which are probably the most effective operators, because they don't want to get tangled up with this crazy, maybe some kind of long-term pre-commitment on behalf of the state to saying we're not going to do that to you again. Maybe these sorts of things, folks would. But which I mean, capital providers would say, okay, maybe there's a long-term path to sustainability here. But how does the legislature pre-commit not going bonkers 10 years from now when it's Democratic or whoever the I'm not sure who was in charge of Florida back in the early '90s, but both Democrats and Republicans are perfectly capable of being nuts and protectionist in various ways. And so whoever comes in next, who can say, right?
Exactly. I mean, you have to go with what's now. And right now, the administration in Florida is very pro-insurance. No doubt about it. I know that the governor's campaign, his reelection campaign, had a lot of support from major insurance players. So I don't think in the current administration they're going to take any actions that would be negative to, eventually drive companies out of the state. They want companies to invest in the state. They want new companies to come in. They want major carriers that have small market shares to grow their market shares in Florida. That's their goal here from everything we've been told.
So maybe we'll just close on this one last kind of theme because, listen, Mark, I'm a career insurance guy. I believe you are too. So if you're on the other side of this issue, you're not going to listen to this podcast. You're going to say, well, they're I mean, they're like, of course they won. They're gloating. They're pounding their chests. They're saying, yay, let's make some more money. Let's screw the consumer. That's what people on the other side are saying, right? But to the best of your ability, can you channel their counter argument? Maybe I'll find somebody to come on the show and talk to me about that. But what else would somebody do if you are a very big skeptic and you don't like, you just sort of look at your CV and mine and be like, well, I don't trust them. What do you do? What's the alternative? Because they agree there's a problem.
Yeah, no, clearly. And there are two sides to every issue. We understand that, and we understand the concerns of the other side, particularly the plaintiffs' attorneys now that have lost this mechanism to drive business their way with the one-way attorney fees. But they don't come up with solutions. That's the problem. We heard one attorney on a recent program in South Florida say that this is a intentional crisis by the insurance industry. They're intentionally wanting to go insolvent because they don't want to pay claims. I mean, just ridiculous assertions. Others have said, you've got a problem in Florida because you deny too many claims. And our counter argument is they don't deny claims in other states. Only Florida has a claim ever been denied, apparently. Never in 49 other jurisdictions, or DC, 50 other jurisdictions in the continental U.S., never has a claim been denied wrongly. People make mistakes. Yes, insurance companies make mistakes too. Only in Florida is it to the point where we have over 100,000 lawsuits annually because claims have been wrongly denied, but no other state. It just doesn't add up. And as I said, I'm sure everybody involved here is open to solutions, to listen to all sides of the equation. But you've got to come up with realistic responses, not you're intentionally wanting to go out of business. Just ridiculous assertions. So until we have some legitimate conversation that actually makes sense, I'm not sure we're going to have any agreement at all between the insurance industry and the opposing sides here.
Well, I am reminded actually of one more thing. You speaking of insolvency and what do claims do? They go to Citizens, and there's some changes to Citizens as well, right? Maybe just give us a quick minute on that.
So the goal here with Citizens is to bring it back to what it was intended to be, an insurer of last resort. Right now, it's pretty much the insurer of only resort for the majority of Florida homeowners. They are going to be at 1.2 million policies in force by year end, approaching their all-time high of 1.5 million just around the corner. They want to depopulate. And the way to depopulate will occur with this new bill. There's two provisions. One is when you get your citizens renewal notice, you also need to get private insurer quotes if available. Some cases it's not going to be available, but if it's available, you need to look at other quotes from the private market, and if they're within 20% of the citizens cost, meaning 20% cap above what citizens renewal is, you must move to the private market. You will be mandated to move. You cannot stay with citizens at the lower rate, because as we know, citizens is not offering policies at what we call actuarially sound rates. They're selling well below market because they are rate restricted. They only got a 6.4 increase approved this year statewide. So you're going to be forced to move if it meets that criteria of the 20% rule. The other big item, though, is flood insurance. Citizens, policyholders will now be asked to include flood insurance as part of their coverage. So they'll have to buy it separately. Citizens will not offer it, but they must have a separate flood insurance policy in addition to Citizens windstorm, if you're a windstorm customer of Citizens. And it's a multi-year rollout, so it's not an immediate change. It's a lot of variances. The first phase, for example, is for those homeowners that live in FEMA designated floodplains, and then it's based on the replacement cost value of your home. I think it's about a 5-year plan, but the goal is to have every Citizens windstorm customer have flood insurance as well. And I know it's being applauded by the folks at FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. They think this is the greatest idea they have ever seen from the private insurance market, or from the property casualty market, I should say, not the private market, because Citizens, of course, is not privately run, but from the property casualty side of the business, to have a model where flood insurance will be a prerequisite for windstorm coverage. So interested to see how it plays out. We think it's a very innovative idea, and we've kind of looked at it and said, well, what about the customer that says, oh, forget it, I'm not going to buy flood insurance, I'm just going to move my coverage. Well, go ahead, move your coverage to a private windstorm carrier and pay 50% or more versus getting a flood policy, which in Florida, if you live in a non-flood designated area, non-floodplain designated area, you're paying about $500 average a year for flood insurance.
Yep.
Well below even the U.S. average. It's running about $500 in, once again, non-FEMA designated areas. So pick your poison here. Do you want financial protection or don't you? That's what insurance is all about, being financially protected from catastrophes. And unfortunately, we saw thousands of Floridians that did not have flood coverage from particularly Hurricane Ian, as well as some from Nicole. They don't have coverage. They have zero financial protection from those hurricanes this year. And look where they're at right now, hoping to get some FEMA funds, very small amounts, typically well under $10,000 is the average FEMA individual grant. That's not going to help you replace your home if it's been destroyed. FEMA grants are not insurance. We continually push this. And the gap that we see in lack of flood insurance, not only in Florida, but across the U.S., is the biggest insurance gap in the U.S. right now.
And I predict years from now a ridiculously competitive market in the non-flood zone flood insurance in Florida, and the prices are going to be kind of down to economic break even, like they do in all mandated coverages in a benign environment. So as long as that risk is, one of the problems with a lot of flood carriers is they don't have data on what benign flood risk is like, because the only people who buy it are people who needed it last year when they got a flood, or are mandated by somebody else in a flood zone. So the thing that I'm excited about, again, as an actuary, is the data that's going to hit the system when you have a pretty hard flood requirement, and many more people in Florida who are going to have to buy the coverage. Okay, well, we can see that the intellectual opponents, their arguments were evaluated at the ballot box, and what happened there. We'll end it there. My guest today is Mark Friedlander of the III. Mark, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, David. Really appreciate it.